All right, let's go ahead and start with introductions. I am Christy Berger. I'm the Director of Social Emotional Behavioral Wellness for the Indiana Department of Education. I've been with the department around 3 years and in this role for the past 2 years. This position was created 2 years ago, and we were small and mighty, and we continue to grow. So we are excited to be here with you all to share. Previously to coming to the department, I spent 10 years down in Center Grove schools as a school social worker for 6 years, and then went back to school to get my school counseling license and spent 4 years in the middle school as a school counselor. Social emotional learning and mental health are huge passions of mine, and I'm so excited for the work that's being done in our state. And gosh, it just gets me excited to be all around all of you. And some of the things that I hear that you're doing, I wish I would have had that when I was in the field. I just know if I go back one day, I would be 1,000 times better than I was then. And just we all continue to learn and grow from each other. And we're so excited to be here with you today, to share information with you today, but also be able to provide you all some opportunity to provide feedback. So before I get started, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Truitt, my co-pilot today.
Thank you, Christy. So I'm Lisa Truitt. I am the Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Wellness Specialist, as well as the State Attendance Officer for the Department of Education. I joined the team in June of 2019, so I haven't been here very long, but long enough. Prior to coming to the department, I was an assistant principal at Eastern Hancock Middle School and High School, and I was there for 8 years. And then before that, I spent a long time in the high school English classroom. And I am thrilled to be spending today with you guys.
Awesome. Well, again, I'm Christy and Lisa, and we will be with you all today. But please know that what we're sharing is from a larger group, much larger, much important than the two of us. We really appreciated getting to work with those in the field and getting some true insight from what is working, what is not, and what we can improve on. There is a bit.ly for our presentation today, but please also know that within the app, we have uploaded the presentation in addition to the draft of the social emotional learning definitions with the indicators. During our time today, we are not going to be able to get as in depth in those indicators as some of you may want to. So we will provide that opportunity for you to give us some feedback. We will really be focusing on the overarching changes and the definitions during our time today. So our objectives for the next hour or so is to talk about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, to address the connection between equity, social emotional learning, to understand the need of updating our social emotional learning competencies, to review those updates, and then again, to provide you all with feedback. I know every time I learn and listen to others, I take something new with me. And so our hope today is that you will be able to take some things with you, but also know that this is an ongoing process. This is something that we plan to adapt and change. And this is step one. As Dr. Aziz told us this morning, this is ongoing practice. I personally have so much to learn. Our team has so much to learn. We are dedicated to the work and really want to be able to get that voice from you all and our students. And so we hope that that continues to reflect in our work. And again, that we show that this is an ongoing process and not something that just updating the competencies will be enough. So to lay the foundation of our time together, I always think it's important just to look at the students that we do serve. And so currently we serve 1.135 million students in Indiana. 47% of those students are on free and reduced lunch. Almost 15% of students are identified as special education, 12% as high ability, 6.4% of our students identified as an English language learner. We have 296 languages that our students and families speak in Indiana, and we serve 1,917 migrant students. Knowing that these numbers change quite frequently, but knowing that laying the foundation of those that we serve is really important to all of the work that we do. So I would love to look then at our Indiana teachers, because we need to realize how important it is for teachers to dive into this equity work personally, but also at that building level. As our student population enrollment has been changing over the last several years, we've seen growth in our Black, Hispanic, and multiracial student populations, and we've seen a decrease in our white students. However, when we look at those of us who serve Indiana students, we see that we are still 92.7% white. As educators, we have to realize that there is a professional obligation to meet the needs of our students, especially our students in minority groups. With this in mind, we are hoping that you all will take the time to be committed and the effort to become a culturally responsive educator. And as stated before, this is an ongoing process, and we hope that you are working at this at a personal level and a professional level. To lay the foundation around diversity, equity, inclusion work, myself and our colleague Kelly Weller and an intern created a 101 presentation around DEI that will be included at the end of this presentation if you are looking for some work to start with your educators. And so when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, we need to look at that personal growth, staff growth, and student growth. And we have it in this order because we believe that the work has to start with us first. We heard that over and over again. And there was a lot of conversation in the chat around adult SEL. And that is one thing that, as a department reflecting back, we could have done better, right? When we rolled out our SEL work, we should have had a little bit more emphasis up front around the work for the adults as opposed to jumping straight to the students. And so we want to be intentional with this work and make sure we roll out in these phases. So during that personal growth phase is really where you'll start to explore. And this helps us to engage positively in the work and help us to empower our students. And once you start to get your footing there and you're ready to go on and talk about this on a professional level, we ask where you look at your staff growth. And so this is where we come together either as a district, as a building, as a grade level, and really look about common language, common policies and procedures, and holding each other accountable while creating that space to learn from one another. Again, this work is personal and this work is so important, and we need to know that we have other professionals that are going to keep us accountable, but understand the importance of growing and learning from one another. And then after those two things have been done, we look at our students. And our students, we want them to be able to engage in critical conversations where they listen to understand and respond with respect. So we want them to be able to listen to their peers and really hear their peers, but also to respond with respect. So this was not planned, that earlier in the presentation we saw this visual, but it goes to show that a lot of us continue to see these infographics around equality and equity. And when we're talking about equality, again, it's ensuring that everyone has the same thing to be successful. So we see in the first infographic, everyone's given the same size of a stand to see the game. And the other picture, everyone is given a bicycle to ride to get where they need to be. And the downfall to this, as we know, is that we're not all starting from the same place. Therefore, we don't need the same thing to be successful. And then when we switch and look at equity, we're trying to understand and get people what they need to be successful. So you'll see in that second picture where what is provided to that person is dependent on their need in order to help them be successful. So then when we look at this justice picture and we look at the difference here, we would love for you all to interact with us and talk about what is different in this picture. So to do that, you can either scan this QR code or join us at slido.com, and that the number that you will need to put in for the code is 95158. And tell us what is different in the justice image. Again, remembering in that image, I'll go back, is really where we're seeing the tree, the supports on each side, the ladders, and the students obtaining those apples.
There we go.
Yep, here we go. Oh, I love liberation when it's removed completely. Support is a common theme. Scaffolding to hold up the tree. Sturdy support versus flimsy support. That's a great insight. Equal access. I hadn't thought about one side's being propped up and one side is being pulled, both in different ways, which could represent a lot of things our students come in with. Talking about access. Feel free to continue to put your ideas in. Again, we really just wanted to come around and talk about laying that foundation. What is different? How is SEL with the new equity lens different than what we were doing before? And really talking about how we can support our students and build those foundations of access to supports. Go ahead, Lisa.
All right. So let's just going to talk about what the history of social emotional learning is in our state, in Indiana. Indiana did not come up with social emotional learning. This was really the work from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And we work with CASEL. I know that Christy meets with them monthly. We don't do anything without going through and getting our supports and resources from them. And so they have been an amazing partner for us. So back in 2018, Dr. Brandy Oliver and Dr. Lori Desautels were tasked with coming up with Indiana's version for social emotional learning competencies. And of course, in Indiana, we like to make everything unique in our own. And so we didn't just follow suit with what CASEL had already created, but we made them Indiana specific. And we also added 2 additional competencies with advances in educational neuroscience. So then, much like the revised competencies we're going to look at today, there was a stakeholder group put together, and they went through and reviewed. And then in January of 2019, the competencies were released. At that time, Christy had a 3-person team. We've now grown to a team of 6. And we've provided well over 200 professional development opportunities just on the competencies themselves. Back in the fall, 2020, we put together an equity stakeholder group. And we started going through and looking at the competencies through a lens of equity and serving all. And so as we went through that process, we reviewed the competencies as well as the indicators. We did this independently, and we also did this in small groups. And then today is the release of the draft version of our competencies, and you will see later today that it's going to remain draft for just a couple more weeks because we want to give you, our audience, the opportunity to provide input and feedback as well. Next slide. Okay, so CASEL has also revised their definition for social emotional learning. They wanted to update the definition and the framework to pay close attention to how SEL affirms the identities, strengths, and experiences of all children, including those who have been marginalized in our education system. So the new definition that they have is SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity in empowering young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. Next slide, please. So when Indiana began looking at revising our competencies that you can see on the screen in front of you, we kind of instructed our stakeholders to look through the lens of equity, to look at responsive language, inclusive, and anti-bias. And so this is kind of where the group's lens was focused as we started this work. If we go to the next slide, you're going to see that these are the people that helps make this happen, and it's a really wide range of stakeholders. We tried to include a representative from everybody. We included 3 national partners. We have state-level partners, schools, youth service agencies, and we met for several months, as I said earlier, both independently and in group work, really taking our time and going through the competencies and the indicators. And so as we went through this process, there were some reminders that just really stuck out to us that I wanted to just bring attention to. And that is that the SEL competencies and toolkits are not to serve as behavior management techniques or as a way for creating compliance within schools. And SEL competencies are meant to work together, and they overlap in certain areas. And so as we were going through, we saw overlap in different areas, and just that's okay. And they're meant to do that. And so that was just a reminder for all. Okay. Modeling is a huge part of social emotional learning. So it's important that we recognize that our adults are just as important in this process as our students. It's a whole community. And so one of the things Christy's already alluded to is that we recognized that in our original work, we didn't address the SEL for adults the first time around. And so we want to acknowledge that and make sure that that's brought to the front, that we've got to also include our adults first so that then they can model and engage with our students. Next slide, please. And this was just a powerful quote taken from notes, and we just left the name off of who said that, but I wanted to read this to you. I think this is just a very powerful quote. I recognize more and more that it isn't the student competencies that need the most work or effort or emphasis. It's the context of school and the educator competencies to understand how social, emotional, academic development is impacted by systemic racism and inequities, and how moving forward or moving toward equity and justice is more about creating a context than about developing specific student skills. And it's on us, not them. All right, next slide, Christy.
All right, so we are going to do an activity together here where we would like you all to provide us with some insight on how can SEL be more explicitly centered on equity. And we are going to do this through Jamboard, which I will put in the chat here in a moment, if I can find it. And what we will ask if you have not used Jamboard before is that when you go to this link, you will pull up, hopefully, you all are probably seeing my entire life right now, but you will pull up how can SEL be more explicitly centered on equity. You will come over and find, you're able to add a text box here and create your responses. Or using the sticky note will make it pop better. So if you use a sticky note, you can pick the color, you can leave your name, you don't have to leave your name, but just how can SEL be more explicitly centered on equity? Oh, I'm hearing that it's read only. Great. Hold on one moment, everyone.
You know what? We can use the chat box. Let's just regroup.
Yep.
How about everybody move to the chat box instead, and you can go ahead and answer there. Oh, wait,
if you can't get access there, go ahead and put it in the chat box, and Lisa and I can transfer it over so that you guys have access to it all later. We just wanted to have a place for you to come back to just learn from one another. So again, feel free to add it on the Jamboard if you were able to get in. I didn't know there was a limit. Or add it in the chat box, and we will go ahead and put your comments there. This was a tool that I actually learned from a group with Castle. I know Pat's on here, so if she can give us any feedback as well, if there was a way to open it to more. But as these are coming in, let's go ahead and just start reading these out. Continue to add them here. Again, you will have access to this to come back. But when we're talking about how SEL can be more explicitly centered around equity, we're considering cultural attitudes. We're recognizing our own bias, which was a lot of the conversation we had as we went through the indicators. How do we teach students that? What does that look like in practice? Exploring students' culture as self-awareness, social awareness, relationships and connections with our staff. And students, SEL helps to give students voice. Yes, bringing all voices to the table. Teach students understand their own intersectionality and reflect on how that may influence their perspective. Yes. Build up educators to have the capacity to see students' unique needs as well as cultural experiences. I love that, right? We are building up, we are building capacity within our adults and within our students. Adult SEL, investigating power and privilege, looking at our bias, having open dialogue around different cultures. Recognizing and addressing uncomfortable conversations. Yes, back to our morning keynote about the elephant in the room. Again, everybody continue to add them in the chat box. Melissa from IU, is there a way that we can save the chat box so that Lisa and I can come back later and add in the responses from everybody? Or if you can help us do that at the end, that would be helpful.
I know how to do that. I'll make sure that we get a copy.
Look at you. All right. Thank you all for that. We are going to be talking to you all a lot from just the conversations and the updates. And so we are doing our best to make that as interactive as possible. If we were in person, we would be making you move and groove, but we will ask that you participate with the Jamboard activities and with our question and answers at the end. So again, going back to foundation, right? We have to look at the foundation of who we serve, who we are, and then also the language that we use. Again, if you go back to the DEI work, that's why it's so important as a staff to create this. And the Department of Education is working internally and working to create our language and working with the governor's team and the other state agencies to make sure that as a state, we have that common language. But for our time today and for our time with the competencies, these are some of the definitions and some of the language that we used as we were reviewing that. So when we're talking about educational equity, we mean that schools are putting systems in place to ensure that every child has the support and opportunity for success. That requires educators to understand the unique challenges and barriers faced by individual students or student populations, and then ensure that additional supports are provided to help them overcome said barriers. So not only are we identifying what those barriers might be, the adults, it is our responsibility to provide our students with the supports that they need to come over that. Looking down, I'll let you all read culturally responsive practices, but looking at agency, we had a lot of conversation around student agency and what does that look like? Is that the language that we're using in the field? Is that the language that our teachers are using? And so we wanted to define that. And when we're talking about student agency, we're talking about them being the agent or person within an active role of their learning rather than the teacher. So this helps to honor the unique backgrounds and experiences of all of our students. And obviously at different grade levels, different developmental levels, the student agency looks a bit different, and we tried to build that within the indicators of the competencies. And then we're talking about bias. We're talking about those conscious or unconscious prejudice against an individual or a group based solely on their identity. So we saw some common themes as we looked at all of the competencies. Again, Lisa laid the groundwork that was saying that the competencies all interact with one another, they go hand in hand. But with that being said, there were some common themes to changes that we made. And so one of the changes was using the language diverse perspective and switching that to multiple perspectives. And the reason that we did this is because usually when we hear the word diverse, the first thing we may think about is race. And we all know that diversity and equity is much more than race. Therefore, we felt like it was really important to use multiple perspectives as a better term to encompass a variety of viewpoints. The second change was throughout the indicators, we heard a lot of students manage this and students will manage that. And we felt like that can seem really punitive. What are they managing and who are they managing it for? And does that look different in every setting that our students are in? And so looking at switching that language to cope. How can we teach our students to cope in difficult situations? And when we're teaching our students these coping strategies, it's important to discuss with them how these are based upon their life experiences and the norms. And so what might work for me as a white woman might be very different than what works for you. And so talking about how our life experiences are different and that how we cope and how we handle stress may look different. One of my favorite changes I think we made throughout the indicators was we talked a lot about students will need assistance from their teacher, from the educator. And really, our educators are so important and they are on the front lines and they are with those students day in and day out. But there are a lot of other people within that school that support our students. May that be our student service personnel, may that be parents that come in as volunteers, may that be the students themselves. And so we changed that language to learning community to really encompass the fact that we want our students to be able to, within their learning community, learn these skills and be able to rely on one another in different settings and in different perspectives. And then the last one, pretty similar to number 2, again, we felt like managed conflict was pretty restrictive and not really allowing for our students to actually work through the conflict. If you're anything like me, previous to this work, I would kind of keep everything inside and then just explode. That's not managing conflict. That actually is harmful to myself and others around me. So we really want those students to be able to effectively work through that conflict again, not just manage it. So as we go through the definitions and through the changes, we'll kind of follow the exact same model for each one just to make sure that there is consistency. We will share the updated definition, common themes, quotes from our stakeholder groups, just to really, again, tie in the changes. And again, if you want to dig deeper, that's where you'll pull up the draft that was attached to our session. And that is what we'll ask you to give us feedback on in a different survey here in a couple or towards the end. So our first competency we're going to go over today is sensory motor integration. And this is the unique sensory development and emotional ability of each person to be aware of their body-mind connection. Gaining sensory motor integration is an important skill for managing transitions, changing routines, and increasing alertness for learning. This competency is essential for all students, regardless of developmental assets or needs. And further, this competency is a part of providing trauma-sensitive education because we know that toxic stress impacts the hearts, minds, and bodies of our children. The two common themes as we worked through this competency, and again, this is one of those that is Indiana specific, ties a lot to the work that Dr. Lori has been doing around neuroscience and just really the research that shows us how important it is for us to be connected with our emotions. And so the first theme was that emotions live into our body. And so helping our students to be able to understand that. If you're feeling flushed because you're presenting in front of a lot of people, or your voice is going quicker, or you're shaking, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how can we calm that space? Also, knowing that the senses are the language of our body. And so being able to pull our students into that, what can you see? What can you feel? What can you touch? Really knowing that that is how we express our body and how we're feeling on the inside. So the quote that we loved was, "Our bodies respond to emotion. We need to work through our emotions, completing the stress cycle, or we stay in chronically elevated states of stress that wear and tear on our nervous system." So again, it goes back to that toxic stress space. If our students aren't able to completely work through their stress cycle, they're constantly staying in that state. And we all know that when we're in that state, our brains are not primed for learning, and that is not going to be the task that we go to as an adult or a student. So that is why sensory motor is so important. Insight refers to the ability to know your emotions and how they affect your thoughts and actions. Gaining insight is an important skill for building self-confidence, self-awareness, and empathy for others. Insight helps students recognize their own strengths, areas of growth, identities, and how they complete each other in the larger society. Insight also helps students value how others feel and think differently from themselves. With Insight, we had a lot of discussion around emotions versus feelings. And we'll put in the chat here, Dr. Oliver wrote a brief that really discusses the difference between emotions and feelings and how can we define that for our students. And I'll show you a quick infographic on the next slide. But that was a lot of discussion that this group had. How are your feelings and emotions different from one another? And how do we teach that to our students? And again, that we're influenced by our core beliefs and cultural norms. And that may look different than someone else. And so let's sit with that and let's talk about it and express what that looks like for us and for our peers. The quote that really stood out to us during this work was that insight not only helps students recognize their own strengths, but others' strengths as they gain a deeper understanding and acceptance of the value of how others feel and think differently from themselves. So again, not just understanding it, but truly accepting that we all have different thoughts and feelings, and we all have different cultural norms. So this is pulled from the article that we will link here shortly, Emotions versus Feelings. And so this is a good way for us to think that through. And to be really honest, I reflected back on how I taught my students to really express how they feel. And I don't know that I always did the best job of explaining the difference. I do know that there is a really great Disney movie out there that helps us walk through all of those feelings and emotions. And I've seen some really great lessons created around that space. But I thought that this visual is something for us to think about as adults. Might be helpful for us as we're setting norms for staff meetings and thinking about our own emotions and feelings and teaching that at the level. And really being able to talk about the difference. And so again, when I'm done presenting, I'll link the article there so that you all have that as a reference as you're working through the competencies.
I've gone ahead and put it in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. So regulation, this is everyone's favorite competency, because when we talk about regulation, we talk about that impulse control. And not only our students need help with this, but our adults do as well. And here is where we worked really hard to remove that language around manage. And so you'll see we went with regulation refers to one's ability to recognize and navigate, not just manage. We're recognizing them and navigating our emotions, feelings, cognitions, and behaviors during challenging situations. Regulation skills build agency, self-discipline, self-motivation, and impulse control. Common themes, I'm sure you all could have guessed, was around student agency, and then also being less prescriptive on those regulation supports. And so again, that goes back to that our students' core beliefs, values, and norms helps them to define what is a support for them to help regulate themselves. And so not saying this is how we regulate, but rather teaching a variety of ways and encouraging students to try them out. If this one didn't work for you, great, let's try this. Or if it didn't work for you one time, let's try again. And what was the difference? How could you really tell it wasn't working? How is it not calming you? Kind of walking through that. And regulation, the quote that we came up here is that regulation is multifaceted, involving one's emotions, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. So again, going back to the importance of providing those options and varieties of strategies to help our students be able to be calm, regulate emotions, and navigate those tough situations. So let's talk about, what does agency look like in your space? So regardless of how you serve youth, how does agency look in your space? And we will use the same Jamboard, hold on. We will use the same Jamboard activity, which means we're probably going to have a limit on that. But again, go ahead and you can post in the chat box if that is easier for you. If you can't get onto the Jamboard, I'm going to put the link again in the, oh, Lisa already beat me to it. Thank you, Lisa. So here is the link to the Jamboard activity. And what does student agency look like in your, wherever you serve students? It might be.
That's not the Jamboard link.
Oh, what, mine is it?
Oh,
no, I just put mine in, sorry. So you'll see that there's how does agency look in your space? So however you serve students, whether that be in a community mental health center, whether that's before or after school or in the school day, what does that look like in your space? Great, we are seeing a lot of good strategies and ways that student agency looks in your space, talking a lot about student choice, whether that be in writing, whether that be for projects. I'm talking about student conferences. The middle school that I worked at, the 7th grade team always had their students lead their parent-teacher conferences, and this was a great way to show that student agency and to have that ownership and for them to model that into their parents. Kids are allowed to choose the activity that they use with the school social worker, classroom SEL lessons, help connect with individual students, just authentic conversations, right? I hear so many times when we're trying to think about SEL and ways to support our students, just stopping and having that conversation that you all do with your students, that is social emotional learning, and you are building those skills in your students. Helping students to learn a variety of coping options, practice choosing the one that's most effective for them in specific circumstances. Yes, and I would assume, Shelby, that you guys practice that before a crisis and then after a crisis, really talking through that with the student, providing check-in and check-out with our students. Meeting with small groups of students in the morning, just talking about what's going well, what could be better with regards to virtual and hybrid learning. Yes, that is the best thing about student agency, is it gives us our student voice. We can guess what is going on, but we don't know until we talk to our students. Allowing the voice and active listening, yes. right? So if we're going to ask our students to have that active voice, then we need to, in return, show them that that voice is being heard and hopefully implemented in your space. So again, thank you all so much for adding those ideas there. Continue to add them in. Again, we want this to be a resource. And it looks like Renee just put in a great article around student agency. Okay. Getting back on track here. So moving on through the competencies, this is actually Lisa, or no, this is me. Okay, working through the competencies, talking about collaboration. Collaboration is the ability to work well with others along lines of differences. Collaboration works to build positive communication, value multiple perspectives, effectively solve problems, and work through conflict. Prior to this breakout, I was in the breakout group, Penn, Harrison, Madison, with Dr. Sears and her team, and hearing superintendents speak these definitions and how they are doing them with students blew my mind. But it was so wonderful just to hear how they are using collaboration and connection in everything that they're doing with their students and naming these different competencies and how they're supporting them. So loved that. If you want any specific ideas from her on that, make sure you get in contact with her. But the common themes that kept coming up was, again, that effectively working through conflict. Restorative circles, right? That's what this is. We are allowed to have conflict with one another. Actually, we encourage that. That's part of growing and learning. It's how we work through it and how we're able to come back to one another after a disagreement and learning that. I don't know about you, but that was not something that I was taught throughout school. It's something I kind of struggled through and managed learning on my own as an adult professional of how I work through conflict and what helps to support me after there has been a conflict situation. Allowing each individual to bring in their own history and their cultural identity. And again, human beings are social creatures, and we cannot survive without one another. We must continue to be in collaboration with one another because that is what we feed off of. And so through this pandemic, we know that our social creature selves, even for some of our very introverted friends, have struggled. And it's because we thrive off that. And so looking for ways to provide that for your students is huge. And then connection, it's the ability to navigate norms and diverse social settings, understand power dynamics, respect the perspectives of, and listen to others. Connection helps students cultivate ways to create a positive community that values multiple perspectives, identities, and experiences. And the themes was from this competency and the indicators was not only do we want our students and our adults to be aware of inequities, but how to stand against them, right? So that's the next step. We need to first be aware, but then how do we stand up against them? How do we stand up for our peers? How do we stand to support them? And really being able to focus in on that connection piece. And we want communities that honor diversity. And so being very intentional in bringing in the diversity within your school, within your classroom, within small groups, if that's how you are seeing students, how can you bring in that diversity of each of your students? And the quote we pulled here was, connection helps us express empathy, care, and concern for others and ourselves.
All right. So the next competency we're going to look at is critical thinking. And critical thinking refers to the ability to make constructive choices and understand metacognitive strategies to enhance learning. Critical thinking skills build responsible decision-making, analytical, and critical inquiry skills, which are necessary to approach learning from an innovative, creative, and diverse perspective. And so in this group, the focus of the conversation was that we really wanted students to take ownership of how they learn best and how to apply those skills for their own success. So if students understand how their own bias affect their learning, like we all come to the classroom, we all come to the group that we're in with our own experiences, and we all, and that affects the way that we see the world and the way that we interact with each other, and to recognize that and understand that. And then we also, students understand their own learning style and initiate those strategies. And this isn't just their career pathway, but we want them to recognize that their wellness as a person, to understand not just their own learning style, but to understand, this is what I need to do, because this is going to make me be the best version of myself, the healthiest version of myself, the best I can be. The quote that we pulled here is, as educators, our goal is that students recognize that their decisions affect their future successes and well-being. And that really does sum up the conversations that we had in this group. Okay, mindset. Mindset refers to the ability to demonstrate cognitive flexibility, innovative and adaptive thinking strategies, and a growth perspective. Developing mindset is a critical learning skill that helps students examine multiple cultural lenses, helping to develop perseverance, self-discovery, resilience, and the ability to receive and give constructive feedback. And when we look at the main themes for mindset, and then next slide, please. We're looking at learning from challenges or failures and trying again. And that's that resiliency, right? That's not shutting down. That's wanting to go through the process and recognizing that the process is just as valuable as the learning outcome. And then looking at, I think we just lost the slide.
Sorry, Lisa. Sorry.
That's okay. The other takeaway was constructive feedback. And, we want students to think through situations from a higher viewpoint, from that growth mindset. When we have, you think about the continuum of students that we interact with. You've got students who are very shy, and you provide feedback and you don't get anything back from them, versus, that perfectionist who might not be the best at understanding how to constructively, take that and grow and learn. So that growth mindset piece is really critical for learning how to take and receive feedback in a constructive way. The quote we pulled here is, adaptive thinking allows students to learn from the diverse cultural perspectives of others. Okay, so let's look at a quick overview. I'm not going to go in depth like Christy did, but the language changes that we made are really important. And so we just want to really quickly kind of go through this again. So we shifted from diverse perspective language to multiple perspective language. Multiple perspectives is a better term to encompass a variety of perspectives and viewpoints. And we went from manage to cope. And the internal discussion was that manage can sound negative, and that the true goal is that students will be able to cope in difficult situations. And then we went from teacher to learning community. Learning community would include all adults and students. And then manage conflict to effectively working through conflict. And again, that's not just knowing how to maybe stifle our emotions, but to work through them in a healthy and productive manner. Okay, so we have one more activity here, a wrap up. And so what we want to know is one thing that you currently do in your work to support equity, or what's one thing that you plan to do next? Either one of those would work. And Christy, are we doing this one on Slido? Okay.
We are back on the Jamboard. So again, if you cannot do Jamboard, we're seeing some in the chat box. Love language change. Yeah, thanks, Pat. Listen and keep listening. Yes, Shelby, that is kind of our team motto, that we are trying to listen and keep listening to make sure we grow and support. We really appreciate you all as we are working through this live. I apologize for the couple of technology snafus. Connecting with more families than ever this year. That's great. Really pulling that piece in. I mean, they're the expert on their kiddo. And so having their input and providing that for them is huge. Leading 2 different equity groups with other staff to help everyone in the building be more culturally prepared. Working with staff to recognize our implicit biases. Implementing 5 Lab to help analyze real-time equity data and patterns that need to be addressed. Revising our current SEL pacing guides, great. Equity teams on schools that we're wanting to expand. professional learning opportunities, giving respect to all staff and students, setting the expectations that we respect each other through listening and trying to understand the other's perspective. So huge. And unfortunately, that's not been really what is represented nationally to us right now. So we all can be the models of what that should look like. Monthly PD for staff on SEL, and that they're looking to be more specific around equity discussions. Great. Partnering with your DEI officer, making sure that the SEL and those initiatives out of that office overlap and working in hand. Working on listening and coaching conversations with parents and teachers, shifting that mindset. Again, giving that space for student voice, adult SEL. A lot of the changes that we really looked at, a resource that we pulled were the social justice standards. So if you're not aware of those, please make sure that you check those out and be able to see how you could implement those in your space as well. Okay, I think we have a few more things to cover, and then we want to give you all some time to ask for questions. And so before, I'm going to pull up what I want to share as well. So before we go into kind of the wrap up / getting some feedback, Lisa, are you seeing this updated competencies? I am. Okay. So this is the document that's attached within this session. But here is where you will see the updates to the social emotional learning competencies. And so the definitions we went over with you today, we went over the themes with you today, but those indicators are where you will really start to see the language changes around coping, around student agency, around anti-bias, and just awareness of others. Here's where you can find that article around feelings and emotions. Again, we spent a lot of time in that space. So this is the document that we would love feedback on. And so as we wrap up our time today, if you would like to provide feedback to us of those SEL competencies, we will ask that you complete the survey by March 19th. So I know that's not a ton of time, but we want to get this out to the field and get it finalized as soon as possible. And so, Lisa, are you able to pull that link?
I am.
So that survey really just breaks down your feedback opportunities. So overarching feedback, and then it broke down into each individual competency. So if you have specific feedback for mindset or critical thinking or connection, please put those in the different categories because that's what we'll pull from when we're looking at our final update for those. And again, that's by March 19th. No need to do that if you don't have time. We completely understand. Also, as you're working through it, like we said, we really want that. Oh my goodness, permissions needed. I even practiced that one. I will update that. So we really want your feedback and how to provide these supports to all of us as we work through this. So again, I will update that here in a moment, but I want to get through these last few slides. Here are some resources that are out there around SEL and equity. Some are pulled from our partners at the national level. Some of them are DOE resources. You'll see the social justice standards here. Earlier, I referred to a DEI PD that's a 101. It's pretty short. It goes through the I do, staff do, students do. So that's a great presentation. If you've heard of the Commission for Improving the Status of Indiana Children, they have created a guide for equity considerations. And so it's a pretty great tool to think through policies and practices through that equity lens. So please feel free to check that out. And then, as I stated earlier, DOE is continually working to provide equity resources. We have a website. It is pretty bare bones, but we are working hard to get some more resources up there. So please tag that or bookmark that and come back continually to check that. And as we shared, our team is forever learning. And so we are currently reading through Coaching for Equity, and we are doing this as a book study as a team on how we can support you all, but also would love to bring you in for a SEL focused book study. So more information will be coming out there. So if you serve in that coaching role, we would love for you to join us, or if you're a teacher or whatever your role is, really coming to have those conversations that can help us change the practice for our students. That will come through our SUBW monthly. And so you'll see when to register for that and when to sign up. I know a lot of districts have already looked at this book and are doing some great work around it. We would love your perspective if you've already gone through this, but we're open for anybody to join us.
Hey, Christy, on a side note, because I know we're going to get asked, if you don't already receive our newsletter, you can go to our webpage, and I can put that in the chat box. And at the very bottom of the page is a place for you to enter your name and email address to get on our listserv.
Awesome.